the historic first gathering of retired clergy for our region. We didn't ask people to register, so I have no idea how many are going to be here, but it looks like a nice conversational group now. And we're hoping to have an opportunity later for you to connect in groups. But first, I'd just like to welcome you and introduce our two staff people, one from the region and one from national. So first is the most important person at this meeting is Michelle Pettick, because she is the one doing the technical hosting. And if you have any problems, feel free to go into the chat and she'll keep an eye on that. And also, if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to record, then you can do that there as well. If you could, perhaps you could put your names or open the chat for yourself and just put what region you're in. And for those who weren't able to share so far, if you could share where your area is, and especially if you're interested in guest preaching, because that is a big need the church has. And the other person, so Michelle's job, I have her title here, is Administrative Assistant, Social Media and Website Management. And she lives, I think, in Leaside. So that's one of the gifts of being able to work online. And our Pastoral Support Minister for our region is Kevin Steeper, and he'll be speaking in a moment. I'll probably mention this at the end as well, but if you're interested in helping to arrange fellowship gatherings in your area, then if you could put that in the chat as well, because we are going to be a self-run. We're not, this is not something that's, apart from being launched by the Human Resources Commission, it's not something that's going to be organized or maintained on an ongoing basis. I certainly have a personal investment, and I've already had a regret from David Iverson, who has indicated that he would be interested in helping to organize in his area. So if we can just keep a record of that in the chat, that would be great. And I also want to say that there is money in 4 presbyteries' budgets, the old presbyteries' budgets, that has been kept in order to fund gatherings of retired folk. So that means that you have budget in your area, with the exception of Halton, and the Human Resources Commission has put money in the budget for Halton in particular. So let's see that. Okay, so why are we getting it together? Why this endeavor? Well, it's because we want to connect the retirees with the wider church, both region and national. We want to create area networks so that more frequent online and in-person gatherings can happen. And so we're hoping that you'll have ideas for how that might happen in your area or other areas, clusters, telephone chains, that sort of thing, and to provide care and support to one another. And we now are officially under the umbrella of the Human Resources Commission. We didn't exist anywhere in the new structure, so that's been nice, and hence Kevin's involvement. And now Kevin is going to, I've got to introduce our national staff person. So we have Michael Blair with us. Welcome, Michael. I'd just like to introduce him. So glad to have you with us. This came as a result, I hope he's going to join at some point, but from Jim Campbell, retired minister in Oakville, who suggested that he thought that that retired ministers would like to know what's happening in the church. And so Michael kindly set aside time in our agenda. I'm just on my wrong notes. So introducing Michael, if you haven't met him, of course, he is the General Secretary of the General Council since November 2020, so entered that role as a pandemic server, and previously held 2 portfolios as Executive Minister for Ethnic Ministry and Church and Mission. He was the executive director of the Toronto Christian Resource Centre, and having served in Toronto, I remember that well. Served Baptist churches in Toronto and St. Catharines, where some of you are. Was a staff member with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at U of T and a community chaplain with the Ontario Multi-Faith Council's reintegration program. He serves as member and moderator of the Commission on World Mission and Evangelism, and in 21 delivered the Gandier Lecture at Emmanuel on the theme of becoming the beloved community. He also recently contributed the afterword to For the Sake of the Common Good, collection in honor of Lois Wilson, one of his mentors. Lois Wilson's going to be on TV Ontario, CBC's Ideas program. So search that on Jam or wherever shortly. He was born in Jamaica. He's a graduate of Ontario Bible College, now Tyndale, where I happen to be teaching in the DMin program, the University of Waterloo, and Wycliffe College, where he actually had my husband as a professor at TST. He has 2 adult sons, and from his Facebook posts, I can tell you that he enjoys representing our church at leadership and regional gatherings and meetings with our sister churches. And he's a great photographer. So welcome to Michael. And now, Kevin.
Thanks, Mórar. Good morning, everyone. As Mórar indicated, my name is Kevin Steeper, and I'm the Regional Pastoral Support Minister for the Tri-Regional area. And what that means is that I'm a chaplain to the ministers who are in paid accountable ministry in Horseshoe Falls, Antler River Watershed, and Western Ontario Waterways. And it's a rather unique position. I don't think anyone else has this position within the denomination as a chaplain to the ministers. So I've been asked to open our gathering this morning with our territorial acknowledgement, and acknowledging, first of all, that we come from a variety of treaty territories. I'm coming to you from Guelph, Ontario this morning, and it's covered by Treaty Number 3 between the Lake Purchase. But we begin now with our acknowledgement. We gathered this morning, and we begin by acknowledging the traditional territory upon which we gathered this morning. For many thousands of years, the original peoples sought to walk gently on this land. They offered assistance to the first European travelers to this territory and shared their knowledge for survival in what was at times a harsh climate. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one based in honor and deep respect. And we would ask if you have any questions for our General Secretary, Michael Blair. You can certainly put them in the chat, and we will be monitoring that. Or at that appropriate time in our gathering, you can use the raise your hand function or wave vigorously, and we'll be watching for that as well. And you can have an opportunity to ask Michael your question. So back over to you, Mórar.
Thank you, Kevin. And now we're going to have Michael lead us in worship and share some of his wisdom with us about the state of the union, so to speak.
Good morning, and thanks for the invitation to be with you. My hope is that I'll combine a bit of worship with a bit of just overview of where I think the church is at today, some of the challenges and opportunities, weaving those things together. We gather this morning as we approach the season of Lent, that significant time in the life of our communities, where we begin to rehearse and retell the story of Jesus. Lent often is the time where we pause for more intentional reflection in terms of our own kind of spiritual journey and our understanding of our faith. We gather, and it's also the season of Black History Month, a time in the life of the Canadian society, but predominantly the North American society, where we pause to reflect on the contribution of people of African descent to the societies in which we live, recognizing the harsh reality of the transatlantic slave experience that has shaped the imagination of many people of African descent on this continent. We gather knowing that we have been invited by God to come together. And so we gather knowing that the one who said, "I am the light of the world," invites us to be present to God, to each other, and to ourselves. I want to shape our time together this morning around the theme of rebuilding or building the beloved community. And so I'm going to invite us to join wherever you are in the singing of a couple verses of "Let Us Build a House." So the invitation for us is, how do we create a space where all are welcome, all are named, all feel a sense of belonging? And this Lenten season and this time of celebrating and acknowledging Black History Month provides us a context in many ways to think again about what it means to build God's beloved community, and that beloved community is a space where everyone is welcome. And certainly as we go through the readings for this Lenten season, we're invited again to consider the life and ministry of Jesus. And we see in Jesus one who creates space, one who opens the doors, one who invites full participation of all in the life of the church. So that's kind of the framing I would like to offer to us as we work through this morning. gonna take you through some things, some scripture, prayer, and give you an overview of the life of the church at the moment. And then we'll be open to any questions or conversations that may come out of this for you. So I'm going to share again. I have a PowerPoint. Can you see that?
No, we don't see it yet, Michael. Yes, yes, we see that context,
Okay.
becoming the beloved community.
Yeah.
Great.
So I think as we start into this conversation, I want to just remind us of a couple things as a way of just helping to ground us. In 2006, at the 39th General Council, at the end of that General Council, there was a call to purpose, which was meant to be a letter to the church from the church. And that call to purpose ended with a prayer. And the prayer ended with this line: God, propel us into your future, rooted in the richness of our past. And for me, it's an important grounding piece for thinking about where the church is at today, is that combination of recognizing that there is a future that we're being propelled into, that is quite different from our past, but needs the kind of richness and affirmation of our past to guide it. A second idea that has been in my mind is a statement from a kind of futurist who talks about the idea of the fact that the future cannot be held in the container of our past. And part of that is a recognition that we're kind of in new spaces. So the text for me to ground this is from, and I think it was the reading for last Sunday's, in last Sunday's lectionary, is a transfiguration. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up high to the mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, This is my son, the beloved, and with him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came out and touched them, saying, Get up and do not be afraid. And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. And for me, this kind of notion, as we start the Lenten season, particularly rooted out of this experience of the Transfiguration, this is my son, the beloved, listen to him. And for me, as we think about the church, part of the question for me is, what is God saying? How are we listening in this time to what God is about and what God is up to? And so I think a significant part of this time for us is a time of discernment, a discernment of the signs of the time, and a discernment of around the question, what is God inviting us into? It's a question that sometimes it's difficult for us, given some of our theological perspective about whether or not God is interventionist, or whether or not it's all about just doing and doing and doing and not reflecting. So for me, I think the church has been invited into a season of reading the signs of the times and discerning the question, what is God inviting us into? And the recognition that God is inviting us into, I think, an amazing time. And part of that, what God is inviting us to is into a place of trust rather than a place of certainty. And so there's a lot of unknowns before us. There are a lot of uncertainty before us. There are a lot of experimentation that we're going to have to be engaging in as we kind of seek to move into the future. And so to the question is not, does the church have a future? But the question is, does the future have a church? And what does it look like? And so I think part of that discernment is around, does the future have a church? And what does it look like, rather than the church has a future? It's a slight different kind of perspective to come at it. And part of it is where the invitation of the text to listen to Jesus becomes really critical. And then that statement I referred to earlier, the future does not fit into the containers of the past. And the recognition that we're all comfortable with the containers of the past. And yet the reality we're faced in is that we can't shoehorn the future into what the past has been. Yet at the same time, we have to recognize that our future is somewhat rooted in the richness of our past. And that's the kind of the tension that we live in. So let me just talk to you a little bit about the context, present context in which we find ourselves, and some of the challenge with that context. So the significant thing about our context is the change in landscape of Canada. And 53% of the total Canadian population identify as Christians. And that's from the 2021 census. That's down from 14% from 2011 and down 24% from 2001. So you can see that in some ways our tribal community as Christians in the Canadian context is declining. And so there is, that's in some ways, in part, a challenge and an opportunity. And in part, it is beyond our, anything we've been necessarily responsible for. It's just a product of the kind of climate in which we live in. So it's an important perspective that in some ways, what this tells us is that the Christendom, as we know, has been declining for quite a while. And the number of people who self-identify as being part of the Christian community is declining. And you can see, if you play that out, that then impacts who sits in the pews. And so it in many ways, it's an opportunity for us to imagine, can we tell a new story to a new generation of people who aren't identifying as a Christian community? But the other reality in the Canadian context is the significant number of non-Christian or people of other faith or people of no faith. So the highest religious community in Canada today are the nuns, the people with no religious affiliation. 20% of the total percentage of Christians are immigrants, which is up 17% from 2011. So you begin to see that there's a sense in which, although Christian population is declining, the shape and look of the Christian population is different, because 20% of the Christian population are immigrants. So that you begin to say that the face of the pew needs to change or be reflective of who makes up the Christian population in Canada. Now, the context, and you probably can't see this very well, is the context of the United Church. So between 2021, sorry, those numbers are reversed. It should be 20. The first number should be 22, and the second number is 2021. So in 2022, we are down to 2,500 preaching places. And we have a total membership in the United Church in 2022 of 338, just over 338,000 people. And we have an average attendance of just over 111. So that's part of the kind of context reality of the United Church, that we talk about the decline, but we begin to see as we track the numbers now, these numbers are based on the blue forms. And so it gives us a kind of snapshot of the reality of what's happening in the church. In the 2021 census, the number of people who self-identify as United Church went down by 1 million over the 2001 census. So in 2001, there was about 2.4 million Canadians who identified as United Church of Canada. In the 2021 census, that was down to 1.2 million people. So, over the course of 20 years, we've lost about 1 million people who self-identify as United Church. So part of that is just to say the decline is real. These numbers, the numbers are showing up to reflect what we know in terms of the decline in number and status. And when you think about it, I just came back from being in Indonesia, and one of the community that I was in Indonesia, their population of churchgoers was about 2.8 million in a country that is over 280 million people, and population, the Christian population in Indonesia is about 10%. So it's fascinating to see what's happening in other parts of the world. So that's part of the context in which we find ourselves. And so one of the questions through this context then is, so what is God saying? What is God up to? How are we discerning the time? And I'm reminded of this part of this prayer that often attributed to Oscar Romero, but was written by someone else. It helps now and then to step back and take a long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it's even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is a way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that it could say. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. No set of goals and objectives bring everything. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything. And there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and to do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between a master builder and the worker. We're workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of the future, not our own. So I think as we think about the context and think about this question, discerning the question of what is God inviting us into, we need to be reminded of what our role is in the midst of that as we seek to listen to Jesus. So I want to just walk through, I think, some of the in that context setting again. So pandemic, we all know what the pandemic has done. Some of you may have been those who chose to retire in the midst of the pandemic, given the reality of what was happening. But certainly the pandemic became a bit of a revelatory time for us. We've seen a significant decline in people actually. It's a double-edged sword with a pandemic, because in some ways, as we come out of the pandemic, we see a bit of a decline in people coming back into buildings for worship. A number of folks are staying online. At the same time, during the pandemic, many congregations reported that they connected with people who they had not connected before, and people from all over the world has been joining. But attendance has become an issue. We've all had to struggle with what it means to be church in a virtual space. And that's an ongoing conversation and struggle that we continue to have. And we also know that one of the things the pandemic has done for us is to really demonstrate how vulnerable we are on the financial side of the life of the church, particularly because so much of our resources is dependent both on rentals and on people in the pews. So you know, we continue to cope with the pandemic from the perspective of us here in the General Council office. We don't see the pandemic as being over necessarily. We're trying to figure out what's the quote unquote new normal that the pandemic has led us into, and there's some issues around that. Property continues to be a challenge for us. We have many communities of faith who can no longer afford their property. And so the struggle with what to do with properties has always been a challenge, but it's been expedited. The pandemic expedited it. The decline in membership has expedited it. So how to manage our biggest assets, and how to hold in some ways the fact that the asset is for the church as a whole, even though local congregations, local communities of faith have been kind of responsible for it. So in the disposition of the properties, how is it that we give back to the whole rather than spend the money elsewhere and not see it as a reinvestment in whatever possible future we may have? So property is a big issue. one of the ways in which we are trying to deal with the property challenge is the development of the United Property Resource Corporation. Some of you are familiar with that, but it's a corporation that we've set up. We've invested $10 million in it. They have connected with government sources and have received, I think, up to $20 million in funding from the government, and are working with communities of faith on properties that can be redeveloped to provide housing, as well as a stream of income for congregations to survive. But that's a significant challenge for us coming out of the pandemic, is what we do with our properties. Ministry. Since 1925, the United Church has not resolved its understanding of ministry. It's a constant struggle for us in the life of the church. We see that in terms of the aging population of the ordered stream. One of the ways in which that got reflected is that our pension plan is identified as a mature plan. And part of it being a mature plan is that there are more people drawing on the pension than people are contributing to the pension. So in this environment, our pension plan is highly dependent upon the markets. So if the markets do well, the plan do well, and we'll have resources to support all of us into our retirement. But the age and demographic of our ministry personnel is a significant challenge for us. The fact that across the country we're seeing more and more what we're calling lay-led congregations. We're seeing congregations who we think never again will have paid accountable ordered leadership, and how we deal with those communities of faith, what kind of support we provide for lay leadership across the country. You know, Northern Ontario is an example, Saskatchewan, some of those places where there are more communities of faith without paid accountable ministry personnel. And that's a huge challenge. And how do we support lay leadership in those ministry spaces? Some of you in particular, it's a hotbed in your region, the question of DLMs, and some folks feeling significantly challenged that the General Council's response to the DLMs somehow is challenging the system of a educated clergy, and we can have conversation about that. But that's a big issue for us, and it's part of the unresolved nature of ministry in the life of this church. The office and board of vocation, who are attending to the issues of ministry leadership and ministry formation, the support to ministry personnel. Many of our ministry personnel are tired, they're burnt out. The pandemic hit people over the head pretty hard, and just how people bounce back to be resilient, and how the church can support that. The question of compensation, you may be aware of, there's been a lot of conversation and debate around the compensation of ministry personnel, and the larger question of formation of ministry personnel, in that many of us come out of an academic system that has prepared us for a church that doesn't exist. And how can we help reimagine formation for ministry leadership, given the reality of what church is today, not what church was yesterday? We're not going to come back to that. Finances, we're in a declining economic environment. We've recognized that we are so dependent upon funds raised from the pew, and that as attendance decline, we find ourselves in a significant financial challenge. And we know that there's lots of stresses in communities of faith because of the economic reality. Technology, welcome to the reality. I don't know where we would be without Zoom. And I think we still struggle with the use of technology. One of the things that I personally recognize is quite, we haven't had the conversation within the life of the church, is to actually begin to frame some conversation around a theology that enables us to embrace technology. What does it mean to be in community in virtual space when so much of our orientation is community, is face to face? And the reality is that we're not gonna go back, I think, to a pure model of face to face. So we have to come to terms with technology. We have to come to terms with AI and the reality of AI and the impact of AI in terms of what that will mean for us. So there's a lot of, around technology, I think there's a lot of theological reflections that we need to do, but it's part of the reality of what we face. So as we look ahead, there are a couple of things coming up. The centennial. So starting this June, we will begin to, we'll begin a process of commemoration. We'll do a 1-year process of commemoration for our centennial to end in June of 2025. We have a process starting now to evaluate the restructuring of the church that happened in 2018. We have a process ongoing at the moment, evaluating the role of the moderator and general secretary, hopefully with some recommendations to come to the next general council if there's need for any changes. We have the 45th general council, which will happen in 2025 as part of the centennial. So, and then we have the autonomous Indigenous church that is, the remit is out by the end of March. We will have some idea whether the church is willing to approve an autonomous Indigenous church within the context of the United Church. So those are some of the challenges, some of the issues we face as we look ahead. I'm going to quickly, so where do we go? So one of the things we have done is that in terms of a way forward is that we have invited the church to embrace a new call and vision. And the call is to bold discipleship, deep spirituality, bold discipleship, and daring justice. And so that's been a new call shaped by a vision which says, called by God as disciples of Jesus, the United Church of Canada seeks to be a bold, connected, evolving church of diverse, courageous, hope-filled communities, united in deep spirituality, inspiring worship, and daring justice. So if you unpack this, you realize that this is nothing new. It's part of the richness of our past, that these themes that we have identified as part of the call and vision is very much rooted in the history of the United Church since 1925, but we have put them together in a way to say, this is who we are as the United Church of Canada. We're people of deep spirituality, bold discipleship, and daring justice. And that's kind of what we want to kind of drive, and that's the what we want to be able to articulate. So we have a strategic framework with growth as the significant leading edge. We are, and the strategic framework is to frame the work of the General Council Office so that we are all clear. We can report to the church what we're doing in the General Council. We will be able to, because we're aligning budget to our strategic objectives and we're aligning staff into our strategic objectives. We're looking at investing in our strategic things, and we're looking at partnership. And so the strategic objectives gives us clarity and direction for the work of the General Council office. And we, at any point in time, we can report to the church and say, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing. Evaluation is a significant part of this. We can say, here's the impact that our work is doing, because so often the work of what happens here in the General Council office, we all know it, but we can't necessarily speak of the impact it's having. So we want to be clear about being able. So the growth is the kind of lead and edge, and growth has two components. One is, how do we help renew existing congregations, but how we also build new congregations. And part of our growth initiative is that we want in the next 3 to 5 years to create 100 new communities of faith in the United Church. Just remind us again of our history, that there was a time when we created new things, not just try to maintain what is. So we have 6 strategic objectives in the church. One is emboldening justice. We call it collaborating to mend in the world. And we are particularly wanting to focus on Indigenous justice, racial justice, and 2S LGBTQ rights, international. We're staffing around this. One of the things we've just done is we have hired a new government relations person, recognizing that we need to change their approach to our advocacy with the government. And so starting in March, we have a new person that's coming on staff as a government relations person that will be based in Ottawa to build relationship in Ottawa and to enable us to be able to reach out to governments. Another objective is to invigorate leadership. And so we are looking at all the ways in which leadership happens in the life of the church, not just paid accountable leadership, but also lay leadership. Nurturing the common good is a third objective, where we're looking at how can we use the resources we have for the good of the whole, not just squander some of those resources, and how can we, from the national church, begin to provide a way of working for the greater good of the church as a whole. I'll speak to a couple of initiatives in a few minutes. Deepening integrity. So we have a commitment to reduce climate, our impact on the climate 80% by 2030. And I'll talk in a few minutes how we're getting there. Strengthening the invitation is the growth initiative. As I said earlier, we're looking at creating 100 new communities of faith. And what we've done is we've broken those down. So one of the initiatives in that is how we are engaging with migrant diasporic communities, as building relationship with some of the Methodists who are coming into the country, and providing a way for a connection between them and the United Church of Canada that will allow for a space for them to worship in their tradition, but be part of the United Church of Canada. And then we have the Indigenous pathways. Those are the 6 objectives from our strategic plan. So a couple of good news. One, some of you may be familiar with Faithful Footprints. To date, we have spent upward of $3 million to support congregations to look at their buildings, to make them more energy efficient. From the work we've been doing the last couple of years, we have reduced our climate impact by about 26%. And so this is one of the ways in which we see ourselves contributing to that climate objective, but one of the ways in which collectively, as a national church, we're trying to support local communities of faith in that. So there's a granting program, there's some resources, people resources that work with communities of faith to help them think through their buildings. The other, and this is part of the work of common good, and some of you may or may not be aware of, we've set up an insurance company called United Church of Canada Protect. And this is where when we set it up, our hope was that we would reduce collectively our insurance costs by $1 million. And the first year we have delivered that. And this coming year, we think we're gonna deliver more than that. But these are some of the ways in which we are trying to support the church as a whole, and take off some of the stress on local congregations by providing something nationally to free up local communities of faith to do the ministry and mission to which they are called. So that's a bit of an overview. And so we sing of God's good news lived out, a church with purpose, faith nurtured, and hearts comforted, gifts shared for the good of all, resistance to the forces that exploit and marginalize, fierce love in the face of violence, human dignity defended, members of a community held and inspired by God, corrected and comforted, instruments of the love and spirit of Christ, creation mandate. We sing of God's mission because we are committed to listening to Jesus. Amen. Stop there. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview, and open to any specific questions. I try to keep it as high a level as possible because I can talk for hours around these things. But I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavor, and then you can tease out the specifics from me.
Thank you so much, Michael. This is, yes, you could talk for hours, but you've done very well to put a lot of information into a short period of time. One of the questions that was asked, which you may not be able to answer, but was how many members did we lose of the 1 million to death over the period of time that we lost 1 million? You may not be able to answer that, but that's a good question, I think, to balance the fact that, and the other side of that was how many are new to the United Church. So what is the increase in folk who are coming into the church relative to those who died?
So good question. And one of the things we're working more intentionally at is to try and have better data. So we have global data, we just need to dig into that. The 2.4, just to say, I think the 2.4 million people who were associated with the census are people who probably were baptized in the United Church, and we didn't see them since they were baptized, but they continue to self-identify. So that census number is somewhat misleading because it's not just people who are in the pews regularly, but it's Canadians who self-identify as the United Church. So we really do want to kind of parse that out as well. We do know that some of the decline in terms of our attendance and membership is due to death, and we have that number. I can pull it up, but in some ways, the other reality we think that is happening, and especially since the TRC and the discovery of the graves, is that people are saying, if this is church, I don't want to have anything to do with it. So there's a number of factors, I think, that is played into that decline. But we have a new staff person who is parsing numbers, so we have a better sense of the numbers, that the numbers don't just mislead us, but we have some more detail. Appreciate the question.
Okay. Were there other questions in the chat, Michelle? I may not be up to date on them.
There
was the only-
isn't, if there's anybody that would like to ask a question, just raise your hand and I'll look for you. Or you can put it in the chat now. We'll just give a few moments for that.
While we're waiting, I wondered if you could maybe answer the question about, are there needs to be filled at the national level that retired ministry personnel might consider?
So we're always seeking for volunteers. And so if you go on the United Church of Canada website, there is opportunities. Right now, I think there's a search. We're looking for folks to serve on the steering committee for the review of the structure. There are a number of the committees of the Office of Vocation that is looking for volunteers. And I think there are about 4 or 5 different categories of resources, but that's on the website, on the United Church of Canada website. There's always what are some of the opportunities to serve in the larger church. The reality is that with the restructuring, we have less and less committees. So when we used to have the permanent committees, there was a lot of opportunities to serve on the permanent committees. In the restructuring, the space that is mostly we're looking people for is to serve around the office and the Board of Vocation. There is a whole bunch of committees and stuff that's there. So.
And we at the region have a great need as well for regenerating as people come to the ends of their terms, which are coming up in June. This will be the second sort of round since the beginning of the structure. So lots of opportunities. And one of the decisions that I came to in retirement was that my calling had shifted and focused. And so I have two callings. One is to support congregations in transition, and since 2016 I've been an EDGE coach and for the United and Lutheran churches, and am continuing that work in its new form. I don't know what the name's going to be called, but as consulting with the growth animators, and also supporting ministers. So I think you made a very clear case for this being the toughest time to be a minister in the United Church of Canada. It may be the toughest time for lay leaders as well, but ministers have so many pressures that most of us who are retired have not had to withstand. And one of the big ones is that it doesn't matter how excellent you are in aspects of your ministry, you are not guaranteed the reward of increased numbers in the pews or in leadership. And I think we're only human, and I think that was a gift that doesn't exist anymore. And so I in the times that I work with congregations for a brief period of time, I help them to look ahead to change, and but also to really nurture the ministers that are coming after me, because if the pressure is greater in one area, the only thing we can do is balance it in another area. So that's something to consider. So those of you who are sitting there wondering if you should get involved, at least be supportive in concrete ways of the ministers that you encounter, if you're watching online or in person. And I know in our situation at Christ First during the pandemic that we had retired ministers who every week would find someone in the worship team to commend for the work that they were doing. And that really kept us going, particularly when in the early months when we were all working till late on Saturday night. You have no idea how important it is and how valued it is for ministers today to get a little positive feedback from a retired colleague. It's a real gift. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Mórar. Michael, thank you very much for your presentation. I wondered if you have any information regarding the denominational backgrounds of those Christians who are coming to Canada. You mentioned relations with maybe Methodists who are coming to our country, but are there any other denominations? What other denominations are represented? And the second thing is in relation to the strategic plan, if you could speak briefly to the growth animators. And I think maybe those present may be interested in knowing a little bit about that position.
So the Census Canada really hasn't kind of give some clarity about what denominations the immigrant Christian population are part of necessarily. So they've grouped people in terms of their racial, ethnic kind of backgrounds, but not necessarily. What we do know anecdotally is that majority of the folks who are coming in, Christian, are coming from Catholic countries, so that there's a significant, if you've been into a Catholic congregation of late, you will realize that even ministry staff in the Catholic communities are staffed by non-Anglo Canadians. And so that's one. We have particularly focused on Methodists, partly because we have a relationship with the Methodist churches. So as you know, the United Church of Canada is considered by the World Methodist Council as the Methodist Church in Canada, even though we're no longer a Methodist church. And so we have been working quite intently with connections in the Methodists through the Methodist family. So the Ghanaian Methodists is one group, the Zimbabwean Methodists, and we have two Zimbabwean Methodist group. One is United Methodists and one is Methodists with British roots. We have some connection with the Haitian Methodists through our partnership with the Methodist Church of the Caribbean and the Americas. We've been working with the Filipinos, and there are about 3 different Filipino tradition of Methodists that are coming into Canada. We are working with, so we have just 2 weeks ago, I met with one of the bishops from the Council of Bishops of the United Methodist Church, along with the ecumenical officer of the United Methodist Church. And so we're working together to find a way in how we can support United Methodists who are coming into the Canadian context and providing support, relationship, and that kind of thing. So that's been our kind of predominant focus, is the Methodist family, just because of those history and some of the United Church, United Church connection. So for instance, in the Philippines, our partner is the United Church, UCCP, the United Church in the Philippines. And so we've been working with the United Church folks from the Philippines. So it's the Methodist and United Church folks who are coming in that we're particularly concerned with. The advantage we have in some of those relationships is that because we have a relationship with the leadership of the churches in the home country, then there's a stronger sense of the leadership saying the United Church is where you can find partnership. So that is working. So as I said, part of the growth initiative for us is to, so 2 parts of the growth. How do we help to strengthen existing congregations, existing communities of faith in terms of their life, their health, and their ministry? So we've hired 6 growth animators that's working with a cluster of regions across the country. And part of their work will be to support communities of faith who are reaching out for help. And then another part of it is that we are looking, as I said, at creating 100 new communities of faith. We're sticking with the language of communities of faith because there's a sense in which we don't know what they're going to look like. We're certainly not looking to replicate what is. If what is works in a context, that's what it would look like, but it's quite a variety of ways. You may or may not be aware that General Council 44, one of the things General Council 44 did was to approve a proposal that allows communities of faith and regions to experiment as long as they stayed within the bounds of the basis of union. So there's a lot of freedom to experiment, and so we hope regions working with these growth animators will experiment in terms of new forms of ministry. What we do want, one of the criteria around the growth is that we want them to be worshiping communities. So that's the one criteria that we're a bit hard on, is that these new communities need to be worshiping communities. In the context of the 100, we've identified that some of those 100 communities of faith are going to be these new migrant diasporic community. And we currently are in conversation with about 40 migrant communities trying to work out how they may fit into the United Church. Some of those communities of faith are going to be francophones, and there's a initiative in place for working with francophone communities, and others will be open, but those are some of the things that we've kind of identified that we're working with in terms of having this 100 communities of faith in the next 3 to 5 years. We'll put some resources into it to make it work.
Thank you, Michael. I'm conscious of time, and I would like us to have an opportunity to introduce ourselves in smaller groups. But if there's one last question that perhaps could be answered briefly, I'd be welcome to hear it if you want to wave your hand madly.
So there is some in the chat. How will, from Ted, how will we see and celebrate growth in the midst of what the demographic suggests will be a continued and dramatic decline? I think about that for a second, and then Gail just wanted to comment. Sometimes it seems to me we're collectively thinking out of a culture of decline rather than one of possibility. I see more grieving and lamenting of loss, but not a lot of, in my opinion, celebration of wealth of assets and possibilities we hold collectively.
And she's just added, why do we need growth in order to celebrate? Which is a good question, but maybe we don't have to necessarily an answer. But I know here in Oakville, where we have 9 churches gathered together, thanks to the leadership of Sheila Murray and others in the town, we've already started talking about planning for our 100th anniversary. So there is celebration happening in some places anyway. But the first question, Michael.
Yeah, can I just quickly? So I think why we need growth, for us, the fact is that I put it this way, and excuse the imagery, with the history and experience of decline, we've become familiar with the stench of death. And we need to remind ourselves that there's something else that's possible. And so to focus on growth is one of the ways we're trying to shift out of this narrative of death, decline. You know, in some ways, it feels at times that we in the United Church have given up the landscape. It feels like we have committed ourselves that we're going to be this boutique denomination of a small bunch of churches thing. And I think the ethos of the United Church, we still have so much to give to the society as a whole, and we need to remind ourselves, and I think growth is one of those pieces that kind of reminds us of that possibility and potential. It's not just about decline, 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 decline. It's about the fact that we're refinding our muscles to invite people to appreciate the gospel, to put it bluntly. So I think that's part of why we need growth. And we're hoping that the lens of growth then allows us to do what you've asked, Gail, in terms of how do we celebrate the resources and assets and contribution that we can make to the church and to the society as a whole. So that's why growth is important. I think in some, we're not, in the wisdom of God, part of me dreams that we could replace everybody we've lost, but that ain't gonna be our reality, and maybe I'm of low faith. But I think what we are trying to do is to remind us all that we have far more to be excited about, that the gospel is real, that the word of the text, this is my beloved, listen to him, that Jesus is inviting us to risky places of standing in the gap, of sharing the good news that God loves people, and to be able to articulate that, because in some ways, so many of us think that it's only the action, you know, that thing, preach the gospel all the time and sometimes use words. I get it, but I think it's also important to say my faith, to be able to articulate that my faith compels me to be in the streets with a sign. My faith compels me to be making sandwiches and welcoming people. So yeah, I better stop there. So I think that's
Okay, well, thank you so much, Michael. And